Do you two ever listen to classical music?
Yes.
Rarely.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Do you ever listen to classical music?
No.
On occasion, yes.
Maybe passively.
Do you ever listen to classical music?
I do.
You do. Wonderful.
When the oil light on my car lights up, I head to the auto shop and ask for an oil change. I drive my car almost daily, but when I pull into that garage and the professionals take over, my understanding of what's happening goes out the window. No matter how much time I spend in my car, my knowledge of how it works just scratches the surface.
The first one we have to talk is Johann Sebastian Bach. We have this thing called the circle of fifths, keys, harmonics, all right? C major. We're getting into accidentals now. Now it's starting to get a little complicated.
Like most people, I love music. But when I sit with a group of my classically trained colleagues, I begin to feel like I'm back in the garage getting my oil changed. Like I am surrounded by people who are speaking another language. I want to know more, and I am determined to ask as many questions as I need to get some answers. I'm Erin O'Malley, and you're listening to Classically Training. Question number 1. What is classical music?
If you had someone ask you to define what classical music is, how would you describe it to them?
That's a difficult one.
Mathematical, designed.
I'm just thinking any music that was done like 30 years ago, possibly. I don't know if I'm right or wrong.
A lot less words, a lot more like vocals. Very dramatic. I would probably say a variety of instruments used as an orchestra.
If you were to describe the classical music genre to someone, what would you say?
Very soft, relaxing music.
It's relaxing, yes, but also theatrical. It's a pretty tough question.
It's tricky, isn't it?
So, I wasn't the only one who was confused, and I started to realize that this question may be harder to answer than I anticipated. My team and I traveled to Randolph, Minnesota to join Mr. Lear's 6th grade general music class for a day. I wanted to go back to the very basics of classical music, and 6th grade music class seemed like a good place to start. Their class has spent the year learning about different musical genres, and today was all about classical music.
Any idea is a good idea. What have you heard? What are the things that you've been told? What are the things you've observed? What can you tell me about classical music? Ryan?
It's classical.
It's classical. I love it. I love it. What does classical mean?
Fancy. It's old.
It's old. Fantastic. Any idea is a good idea. Seneca?
Calm and relaxing.
Calm and relaxing. Interesting. I like that. Ryan?
It doesn't really use electric instruments.
Oh, so it's like, yeah, I like, so I'm gonna write no electric instruments.
And harp.
A harp. Ooh, very good.
Woodwinds.
Woodwinds. Oh, nice. What do we know about classical? Let's get away from instruments a little bit. Who listens to classical music? Seneca.
Older people.
Older people. Interesting. I like it. I like it. Do you mean
The students went on to agree that not all older people listen to classical music, so their teacher asked for some more clarification.
Old fancy people.
Old fancy people, all right. And could you expand on what you mean by fancy?
Maybe like people who used to like fight in wars or something.
Oh.
Usually like older retired people because they have more time to listen to music.
Interesting. People with more time. I like that too.
Mr. Lear then proceeded to play a few songs for his students and ask if they were classical or not. Most students agreed that song number 1, which happened to be Beethoven's First Symphony, was classical.
All right. Is it classical?
Yes.
Yes. Tell me why.
It's like you can hear like the violin.
You can hear the violins. Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's like no words in that one.
There's no words. No one's talking. Absolutely. Very good. Sam?
Yes, and it almost sounds like a Disney movie.
Oh, interesting.
The class then went on to listen to a few more pieces. We heard the music from Harry Potter, listened to part of the Moonlight Sonata, and the opening of the Peanuts theme song.
All right, one more for you. Emma, what do you think?
I would say no, just because there's not like really any instruments at all that we talked about.
I know it's got words in it, but the vast majority of people who, listen to music and think about it professionally would call that classical music because it was written like 300 years ago and is typically performed in fancy spaces for people with lots of money and tuxedos. So now we're really confused, right? Because at first it was, just your violin.
It's true. At this point, we were confused, myself included. Mr. Lear then goes on to say that there are two things needed to produce classical music.
Time, money. Is singing something that you need a whole lot of training to be good at? Or can you just kind of start singing?
Yep,
You can just kind of pick that up. Whereas if someone's really good at the violin, that means they have put a lot of time and money into learning how to be good at the violin. So I'm not saying that classical music is, bad or anything because people with time and money listen to it or make it. It just is a little less accessible because you need to put in that time and money in advance. Does that make sense?
Well, I felt like I now had a decent understanding of who classical music was originally created for and why I know more musicians than classical musicians. I still had a lot of questions about what actually went into a piece to make it classical. I thought it was time to call in an expert. So, Bill Eddins, you are the former music director of the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. And for those of you like me who are not familiar with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, based in Canada, they're really good. So our goal today is to answer the question of what is classical music. And my team and I went out earlier this week to go talk to some people on runs and walking their dogs, stopping them on the corner of a lake to ask them what they thought classical music was. So I'm gonna summarize their answers to you to see, one, are they right? And two, if they are wrong, why are they wrong? And where do you think these answers came from? All right?
This is gonna be fun.
Here we go. Classical music is anything written 30 years ago. Classical music is relaxing. Classical music is mathematical. Classical music is opera. Classical music is fancy. Classical music is music from movie scores. Classical music is Beethoven and Mozart. Classical music is music that an orchestra plays. Classical music is music from a certain time period. And classical music, you'll know it when you hear it.
Wow. Wow. I would say a couple of those are spot on. There's a little fudging there because we can talk about classical music and we can also talk about the classical period in classical music. So one of those answers kind of fell into that category. But I could kind of take issue with almost everything else.
Okay, so this means we have quite a journey ahead of us today then. First, I gave you a homework assignment. And I asked you to select 3 pieces of music or 3 excerpts from pieces of music. And the first one I asked you to provide was a song that represents what everyone's thinking about when someone says the words classical music. If they had to think of a classical piece, this is going to be the first one to pop into their brains. So, with that being said, we're going to take a listen to this song right now, and then we're going to talk about it.
Roll tape.
Yep, there it is.
There it is. Who wrote that?
Beethoven.
You know that.
I know, even I know that.
You know that. What's your background in music?
Limited.
But you know that, right? This is one of those pieces that is just part of culture, right? The Allies used the opening of that piece to symbolize victory in World War II. That's how much it's part of just kind of humanity now, right? So I picked that piece for a ton of reasons. One
Yeah.
is that I knew that you would know it.
Yes.
I
Good
knew
job.
that-
I did.
99% of the people who are going to hear this podcast would know that instantly.
Why?
Okay, let's identify things that would kind of make it classical. Okay, it's an orchestra. It's the classical orchestra, right? You've got the strings and the woodwinds and the brass and percussion. So that's kind of a hallmark of classical music. You have a theme, and the composer ends up working with that theme and spinning out movements that are 7 or 8 minutes long. The theme is da-da-da-dum, and everything in the rest of that movement is kind of related to that theme. That's a hallmark of classical music.
I'm going to read you Google's definition of what is classical music and see what you think.
Okay.
All right. I believe this is from the Oxford Dictionary. Someone can fact check me on that. Classical music. Serious or conventional music following long-established principles rather than a folk, jazz, or popular tradition. More specifically, music written in the European tradition during a period lasting approximately from 1750 to 1830, when forms such as the symphony, concerto, and sonata were standardized.
Is my
thoughts.
I have a couple. I'd really like to take out the entire first half of that and just crumple it up and
Get rid
throw
of
it
it.
away.
All right, so lots of people that we talked to said classical music was music played by orchestras. And so, first question I have, is classical music instrument specific?
No.
It's not. So, I could play classical music on ukulele, recorder, banjo.
Oh, certainly.
Really?
Oh, certainly. The instrument really doesn't matter. There can be a tendency for a particular genre with individual instruments. Ukulele, classic example. You want to hear Hawaiian music,
Right.
right? It's very much part of Hawaii. Piano, you can do anything, but you can do anything on the ukulele as well. There is a large amount of classical music written for the orchestra.
Okay, so
And
that's probably why we're picturing it.
It's certainly one of the major vehicles of classical music.
All right, so a couple people we talked to mentioned time period. This definition by Google also mentioned time period. They said 1750 to 1830. Is there such a thing as contemporary classical music?
Oh, of course.
So someone could write a piece of classical music today.
I have many, many friends who are composers who are writing what I would probably call classical music every single day.
But there is a classical period of music, but that doesn't mean it stopped there.
Exactly.
So, is there any easy way for us classically lay people to say, these are the rules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
You want the honest answer?
Yes.
No. There really isn't. At the beginning of your understanding of classical music, there is. And the more you understand about classical music and the more classical music you hear, it starts to become no, because there are so many things that you could claim, oh no, that's classical music.
But can you give me, before we play our second piece here, are there a couple things that maybe us beginner babies, classical music babies, can learn to identify? Our very first steps into classical music, what should we be listening for?
Sure. First thing, the theme.
Theme. That's a big one today.
Theme. It's a big one. Dum bum 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 dum 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 dum. Ever heard that?
I've heard that.
Yeah,
yes.
I know you've heard that. Everyone's heard that. Everyone on the bloody planet has heard that. All right. Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart. All right. Theme, 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 and it just kind of sticks in your head, and you go, oh well, that's the theme. Da 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 da. So that is what the rest of the piece is kind of built around.
All right. What's something else we can listen for?
Keys, harmonics, all right? The harmonies, which is how individual notes relate to each other. So dee, dum, dum. Like they're kind of right next to each other, and so they relate. Dee, that can be all over the place. So when you have keys that are closely related to each other, we say it's very harmonious, right? It even sounds right. The word sounds right. Harmony, harmonious. Everything sounds to our ears as if it's very pleasant. It's very related. Now, it can be still very dramatic, like the Beethoven excerpt that we heard, because that's in a minor key, so it's got a lot of drama. But they all sound pleasant. All the notes sound pleasant together.
They fit together.
Yes.
I think we should go into our second piece. And this piece, I asked you to choose something that did a good job of demonstrating the elements that go into a piece to make it classical. Is there something I should be listening for before we start this?
I decided to limit things to the orchestral world because I could really let's just put it into this little particular box. All right. You get to the point of Stravinsky, who wrote this 110 years after Beethoven wrote his Fifth Symphony. It is much more complicated. You're not listening for the theme anymore as much as you are listening for, ooh, that sounds beautiful. What is that?
Okay, listening for beauty. Let's hear it.
So let's start off. This little dance is called a berceuse. So I call this accompaniment figure. And then I hear this instrument. It's a bassoon.
Pretty.
And notice underneath, there's that accompaniment still in this. Suddenly, hear the different colors?
Do, totally.
And then we're back to
the bassoon.
That bassoon with that underneath is still that accompaniment, but he changed it just a little bit there, right? There were some higher notes in the strings. There was a different instrument that had the theme just for a second. It's gonna happen again. That's an English horn. These lovers, they're having this conversation, right? What is that?
I don't know, what is it?
That's the harp bringing us into this glorious moment. Is this funny music?
No.
Is this sad music?
No.
Then what is it?
Playful.
There's a little playful.
It's totally romantic.
Totally. Sensual.
Yes.
Right, he's brought you into his universe. And he's done it just by changing what instrument is there, a little bit the dynamics, right? Because the opening was like this. It's a little quieter. But there's that moment in the middle where, suddenly just everything kind of opened up. And you can't not think that is beautiful romanticism.
No, your heart just swells.
There is an element right there of classical music that Stravinsky just shows at the absolute peak of it. That piece right there was you can only call it a seminal work in classical music. It was groundbreaking.
So this is really interesting to me because I think the impression that people get from classical music is that it is very rigid. We talk to people and they say things like mathematical, people, I think it's very established in people's mind, but what it sounds like when I talk to you is it's a continually, it's just about breaking rules and there's nothing necessarily classic about it except that they're all continuing to chip away at the classic parts of it.
You have made an extremely important point, because yes, classical music is extremely mathematical when you deal with the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, who I call him the great codifier, the one who just okay, this is how we're gonna do music for the next 400 or 500 years. And he wrote the rule book. And then everyone who came along went, I'm gonna change that rule. I'm gonna change that rule. So it's constantly changing, constantly evolving.
So maybe the part that's classical about it is it's informed by traditions that were established by Bach in that time period. How does that feel when I say that?
I like this direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I asked you to do this originally, I saw a little bit of fear in your face. The strongest reactions are coming from people who are most deeply entrenched in this. Why is it so scary?
Because we know how vast this ocean is that we're diving into. You and I have been sitting here putting a toe into a little puddle. And the concept of classical music is as wide and deep as the Pacific Ocean.
I have learned a lot today. But I think it is time for our last piece of music. And this might be the piece I am most excited to hear your selection of. I asked you to choose a piece that captures what you love about classical music. So let's hear it.
Here it is.
It's not instrument specific.
Do you know what this is?
I do. I may not know my classical music, but I know my musical theater.
Of course. Well, Mr. Bernstein, West Side Story, another one of those just seminal moments in music history. I've met a couple people who were at the Broadway premiere of this, and they said it was one of the most incredible moments of their lives. Is it classical music? It was written for Broadway, but is it classical music? From my perspective, it is totally classical music. How the whole piece, the whole 2.5 hours works. It's all built on ba-da-yum, just those 3 notes. That's so classical of Lenny. At the same time, this is a guy who had his ears to the ground. I just did that, right? I just went snap, snap, and we heard that within the first 10 seconds.
I'm a classical musician now.
Right, exactly. Is it classical music? Yeah, I would really argue that it is. Did it break new ground? Yes, absolutely. That's an element of classical music.
That's so fun for me because, like I said, I know my musical theater, and I have to say West Side Story is probably my favorite musical of all time because of its music that could make you just weep. It could make anyone want to get up and dance.
Right.
And I don't associate that with classical music at all. And I've listened to it 100 times.
Really? That's interesting. That's exactly what I associate with classical music.
Final question. What is your advice for someone who is classically training? What should we do if we want to learn more about classical music?
Wow. Keep your ears open. Listen. Listen to everything. Stop having those assumptions within yourself about what you're supposed to be hearing. Then you'll actually be able to hear what the music is telling you. So keep your ears open. Always listen.
And that's going to help us if we're classically training because like you mentioned, everything can kind of be argued into classical music. So nothing is not helpful. Nothing is not giving you information.
Exactly.
Well, Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been super fun.
It's been a blast.
When I thought about classical music, I imagined it as rigid and incredibly precise. Like a math problem, there was a right and a wrong. And I didn't walk away with a definitive definition for what made a piece classical, but after talking to people and asking them questions, it seemed like classical music, like a lot of art forms, is the opposite of rigid. It is boundless. There is a whole world of possibility within the genre. And what I did learn is that your ability to explore that world and its possibilities increase the more you learn. So I think I'll keep going and see what I can find. You've been listening to Classically Training. This podcast was produced by Daniel Nass, video production by John Reynolds, technical assistance by Evan Clark, Josh Savageau, Derek Ramirez, Eric Romani, and Micah Kopecki. Special thanks to Elijah Lear, Bill Eddins, Katie Condon, and YourClassical NPR. And thank you to the Kling Innovation Endowment for making this possible. This is APM, American Public Media, sharing the power of classical music.